He didn't knock. Men like Damian Cross never knocked. He walked into Alara's life the way a fire walks into a dry room, without permission, without warning, and with the full intention of consuming everything inside it. The morning she found the envelope slid under the door of her apartment, she was 26 years old, 8 weeks pregnant, and still foolish enough to believe that the man she loved would protect her if she told him the truth. The envelope changed that. Inside was a single photograph, her, sitting across from a federal agent at a diner she'd visited only once, shot from a distance, the angle deliberate, the framing designed to make an innocent meeting look like betrayal. Beneath the photograph, a handwritten note in clean block letters, "Leave tonight, tell no one. Or the boy Roman trusts most will make sure you don't leave at all." She left that same night with $40, a duffel bag, and a secret she would carry alone for 6 years. If you're watching this right now and you've ever had to choose between the truth and survival, drop your city in the comments below. Let me know where in the world this story found you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next is the kind of story you do not want to walk into halfway through. The bakery didn't have a name for the first 3 months. Alara told herself it was because she hadn't decided yet. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. Naming something made it real, and she wasn't ready to believe this life was permanent. The life where Roman Valles didn't exist. The life where she woke up at 4 in the morning, not because a man she loved was beside her, but because bread didn't rise on its own, and rent in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood didn't pay itself. She'd chosen Pilsen deliberately. It was far enough from the Gold Coast that Roman's people rarely moved through it, but close enough to the city that she didn't feel completely buried. The storefront she rented had water damage along the north wall and a back door that stuck in humidity, and the previous tenant had left behind a broken display case and a laminated menu for a sandwich shop that had failed sometime in the previous decade. She fixed the display case herself with YouTube tutorials and a second-hand drill. She left the stuck door alone. Some things you learn to live around. By the time Milo was born, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, Roman's exact jaw and her mother's eyes, the bakery had a hand-painted sign above the door that read Voss & Co. The & Co. was for a partner she didn't have yet. She'd put it there as a joke. It stopped being funny around the 3rd month of solo 4 a.m. shifts, but by then the sign was dry and she didn't have time to repaint it. Milo grew up in the back of that bakery the way some kids grow up on farms or in libraries, shaped by the place before he understood it. He could identify sourdough by smell before he could read. He knew how to stay out of the way when the oven was open, how to stack cooling racks without tipping them, how to talk to the Wednesday morning regulars who came in mostly for conversation and bought pastries as a cover. By 6, he was the kind of child who made adults feel strangely hopeful. Not because he was well-behaved, though he mostly was, but because he watched people with a seriousness that didn't belong to his age. He listened the way some kids watch television, with his whole face. Alara told him his father was gone. Not dead, she couldn't bring herself to that particular lie, but gone. She said it simply, the way you say a thing when you've rehearsed it enough that it no longer cracks your voice. He left before you were born. He didn't know about you. That's not your fault, and it's not mine. Milo had accepted this with the same quiet gravity he applied to most things, and if he grieved it, he did so in private, which somehow made it worse. She'd built something real in 6 years. Not glamorous, not large, not the kind of success that gets written about, but real. She knew her suppliers by first name. She had a Thursday afternoon rush that required 2 extra trays of the honey walnut rolls. She had a boy who did his homework at the corner table every afternoon and who, on slow Tuesdays, helped her fold pastry boxes with a concentration that made her chest ache in ways she couldn't fully explain. She had almost convinced herself the past was finished with her. She was wrong about that in the specific catastrophic way that people are wrong when they have been careful for a very long time and begin to mistake caution for safety. The rain started on a Tuesday in November, the kind of cold Chicago rain that comes in sideways and makes every awning useless. Alara had opened at 5:30, which was 30 minutes earlier than usual because she'd overproofed a batch of brioche and needed the time to salvage it. She was at the counter when the first black SUV stopped in front of the bakery, then the second, then the third. She recognized the formation before she recognized anything else. 3 vehicles, staggered, one facing the opposite direction. A driver who stayed behind the wheel of the lead car with the engine running. Her hands went still on the counter. The front door opened. Two men entered first, large, quiet, wearing the particular blank expression of people paid to look at rooms before other people walk into them. They scanned the space without making eye contact with her, checked the back hallway, and then one of them stepped aside and held the door. Roman Valles walked into her bakery at 5:47 in the morning, and the first thing she thought, before fear, before strategy, before anything remotely practical, was that he looked exactly the same, older. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his jaw carried the kind of tension that doesn't come from one bad week, but from years of them. But the way he moved was identical. That specific stillness he had, the way he occupied a room like he'd already decided nothing in it could surprise him. He spotted her in approximately 2 seconds. He stopped. She didn't move. For a long moment, neither of them said anything, and the silence in the bakery was so complete that she could hear the rain hitting the front window and the low hum of the proofing oven in the back and nothing else. "You're not dead," he said finally. "No," she said. His jaw tightened. "I looked." She believed him. That was the worst part. She believed him completely, and it didn't change anything she'd done, which meant she had to stand there and hold that knowledge without letting it move across her face. "I'm going to need you to tell your men to wait outside," she said. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned his head slightly and said one word, "Out," and the two men who'd entered with him left without a sound. The door closed. Roman walked to the counter but didn't sit. He was wearing a dark coat, rain damp at the shoulders, and he hadn't taken it off, which told her this wasn't meant to be a long conversation. He had the look of a man who had arrived with a specific intention and was currently recalculating everything. "This is yours," he said. It wasn't a question. 6 years. Pilsen. He said the neighborhood name like he was placing a piece into a puzzle he'd been working on without knowing it. "I had people in Wicker Park, Logan Square. I never thought—" He stopped. "Why Pilsen?" "Because it was the one place your people weren't." Something moved through his expression that she couldn't name. Not hurt. Roman didn't do hurt in ways that were visible. She'd learned that early. Something closer to the recognition of a strategy he should have anticipated. "I'm not here for you," he said. "I know. Kowalski's people have been running something through this block. A supplier who uses your street as a handoff point. I'm here to—" "I know about Kowalski," she said. "The blue van. Tuesday and Friday mornings, parks by the hardware store. I've already talked to a detective named Reyes about it. I'm not involved and I have documentation proving that, so if that's what you're here about, the answer is on file at the 9th District and you're wasting your time." He looked at her with an expression that might, on someone else, have been amusement. "You talked to a cop." "I talked to the right cop." "You always were." He stopped again. The back door that stuck in humidity chose that moment to open, because Milo had heard the front door and had gotten curious the way 6-year-olds get curious, which is to say, completely, and without any awareness of timing. He came through the kitchen doorway carrying a cooling rack with 3 test rolls on it. He'd been helping her proof a small batch when she'd asked him to wait, and he walked out into the front of the bakery with that particular focused expression he had when he was carrying something he didn't want to drop. He saw Roman and stopped. Roman turned. The silence that followed was a different kind than the one before. That silence had been tense and careful. This one was something else entirely. The kind of silence that happens when a truth that has been held in a sealed room for years is suddenly exposed to open air. Roman's face did something she had never seen it do in the 3 years she'd known and loved him. Every layer of control, and Roman Valles had more layers of control than most men had personality, came apart simultaneously. Not into rage, not into grief, into something rawer than either, something that looked almost like being struck, except the blow was invisible and came from the inside. He was looking at Milo's face. She knew what he was seeing. She'd seen it every morning for 6 years in the particular way her son tilted his head when he was thinking, in the line of his jaw that was not her jaw, in the eyes that were the wrong shade of dark to have come only from her. Milo, for his part, looked at Roman with the same serious attention he gave everything unfamiliar. He didn't seem frightened, he seemed to be evaluating. "Hi," Milo said. Roman's mouth opened and closed. "These are test rolls," Milo said, holding up the rack slightly. "They're not for selling. Mama is fixing the ratio." Do you want one? Roman looked at Alara. She met his eyes and held them, and what passed between them in that moment was not a conversation she could have prepared for. No matter how many times she had imagined this possibility in the back of her mind at 3 in the morning when the bakery was empty and the only sound was the oven and her own thinking. Is he mine? Wasn't a question he asked out loud, but it was in his face so clearly that she felt it like a sound. She gave a single, small nod. Roman turned back to Milo. He lowered himself to one knee. Not quickly, not smoothly, but the careful way of a man whose body was accustomed to the world being eye level and who was choosing, with effort, to make it smaller. He looked at her son, at his son, at close range, and his expression had gone completely quiet in the way that water goes quiet before a storm moves over it. "I'll take one," he said. His voice was different, lower, slightly unsteady in a way she had never once heard from him. Milo handed him a roll with the gravity of a child completing an important transaction, and Roman took it in both hands and did not eat it, just held it, and Alara had to look away because watching Roman Valles hold a bread roll, like it was something fragile, was more than she was currently equipped to process. "What's your name?" Milo asked. "Roman." Milo considered this. "Do you know my mom?" "I did," Roman said, "a long time ago." "She doesn't talk about before," Milo said, with the casual accuracy of a child who has observed something and simply reported it. "No," Roman said. "I imagine she doesn't." He stood back up. He turned to face Alara, and whatever had cracked open in him had not closed back. It was still there, visible beneath the surface. A fault line he wasn't bothering to hide. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Not here. I'm not going anywhere with you." "Alara, I'm not." She said it without raising her voice, which was more effective than raising it. "You walked in here with 3 cars and 2 men who looked at my son without blinking, and whatever you're feeling right now, Roman, you don't get to make decisions about my life on a Tuesday morning with no warning. So if you want to talk, you talk here, or you don't talk at all." He looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone, typed a brief message, and set the phone face down on the counter. "Milo," Alara said, "can you go finish checking the second batch? The timer's going to go off in about 4 minutes. Milo looked between the 2 adults with those serious eyes, clearly filing the situation for later analysis, and then nodded and went back to the kitchen. The door swung shut behind him. Roman waited until the sound of small footsteps faded, and then he said quietly, "How long?" "Since before I left." "You knew?" "I suspected. I confirmed it 3 weeks after Yes, I knew." He turned away from her. He put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them, and she watched the muscles along his jaw work through something she couldn't name and didn't try to. "I was going to tell you," she said. "That was the plan. I found something, Roman. Inside the organization, something I wasn't supposed to see. A set of accounts that ran through a holding company in Delaware. Payments. Recorded communications. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. And I went to find you that night to tell you everything. But before I could get to you, someone left an envelope under my door." She kept her voice even. She'd had 6 years to practice this. A photograph of me meeting with someone who I now know was an undercover federal contact. Though at the time I had no idea who he was, I thought he was a journalist who'd reached out about a local story. The photo was staged to look like I was working with law enforcement. The note said if I didn't leave that night, someone inside would make sure I didn't leave at all. Roman was very still. "I didn't know who to trust," she said. "I didn't know who'd set it up or how far it went. I was pregnant and terrified, and I made the decision I made, and I have lived with it every single day since." He turned around slowly. "Who gave you that envelope?" he said. Not a question. The tone of a man who already had a name forming in his mind and wanted to see if it matched the one she was about to say. She looked at him steadily. "I didn't know for certain until about 8 months ago," she said. "When someone reached out to me, someone from inside who'd been watching what happened for years and finally decided they couldn't stay quiet anymore." "Who?" She held his gaze. "Damian Cross," she said. The name landed in the space between them like something dropped from height, and Roman's expression changed for the second time that morning into something she had never seen before and hoped she would not see again. Not rage, not even the controlled danger she'd witnessed from a distance in the years she'd known him. but something colder than both. A man doing arithmetic. A man counting back through 7 years of decisions and beginning to understand the geometry of how they'd been made for him. "Damien," he repeated. "Yes." He was quiet for a very long time. Outside, the rain continued its sideways assault on the window. In the kitchen, a timer went off with a soft series of beeps, and she heard Milo's footsteps cross the tile, heard the soft creak of the oven door, heard her son move through the rhythm of a morning he'd helped her build one ordinary day at a time. Roman looked toward the kitchen door, and the expression on his face was not something she had words for. "Does he know anything?" he asked. "He knows his father left before he was born and didn't know about him, that's all. And the rest? He's 6. I know how old he is," he said quietly. She felt that like a finger pressed against a bruise she'd forgotten was there. "I know how old he is." He'd worked it out immediately. He had probably worked it out the moment he saw Milo's face, and that precision, Roman had always been precise, sat in the room with them like a third presence. "I need to ask you something," she said. He looked at her. "Are you going to make this about control? Because if you're standing here right now thinking about how to manage this, how to contain it, how to use it, how to fold it into whatever you're currently running, stop. Roman, I said stop." He exhaled slowly through his nose. I don't know what I am right now. I'm not thinking about the organization. I'm thinking about a kid in your kitchen who just handed me bread." She studied his face. He looked, beneath all of it, exhausted. And underneath the exhaustion, something else. Something almost frightened, which was so foreign to Roman Valles that it took her a full moment to recognize it. "He has your hands," she said. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out anyway. Roman looked at his hands, still flat on the counter, and then back at her. "Ilara," he said, "don't. I'm not going to make promises right now. I know better than that." He straightened. "But I need you to understand something. Whatever happened 7 years ago, whoever engineered it, this is not finished. If Damien knew you were alive and that you had information, he's been watching. And if someone told him I came here this morning," she felt it before he finished the sentence, the cold, specific understanding of a woman who had been running a quiet life for 6 years and suddenly understood that the quiet was over. "He'll know," she said. "He'll know by noon." She looked at the kitchen door. "I need to think," she said. "You have until noon," he said. "After that, thinking becomes a luxury we can't afford." He picked up his phone from the counter. He paused before turning toward the door. "He offered me the role before he knew who I was." "That's just how he is," she said. Roman nodded once, slowly, like someone filing something important in a place where he would not lose it. Then he walked back out into the rain, and Ilara stood behind her counter in the bakery she'd built from nothing, listening to the oven hum and the rainfall and her son moving quietly in the kitchen, and she understood with complete clarity that the life she had carefully constructed over 6 years of early mornings and flour-covered hands was now running on borrowed time. She wiped down the counter. She went into the kitchen. Milo looked up at her from the cooling rack, his face open, unguarded, asking without words. "He's someone I used to know," she said. Milo considered this. "Is he going to come back?" She looked at her son's face, Roman's jaw, her eyes, 6 years of early mornings and test rolls and bedtime stories and homework at the corner table, all of it. And she told him the only true thing she had. "Yes," she said. "He is." Roman's convoy had been gone for 11 minutes before Ilara allowed herself to sit down. She didn't sit in the front of the bakery. She sat in the kitchen, on the overturned milk crate she kept near the prep table for exactly this kind of moment. The moments when her legs decided they'd done enough, and the rest of her needed to catch up. She put her hands flat on her thighs and looked at the wall, and breathed in the way she'd taught herself to breathe years ago, slow and deliberate, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way you'd breathe if you were trying to convince your body that nothing was on fire. Milo was eating one of the test rolls at the corner table with a library book open in front of him. He'd accepted the return to routine with the same quiet compliance he offered, most things that confused him, absorbing them, filing them, processing them on his own internal schedule. Ilara had learned not to push. He'd come to her when he was ready, and when he did, his questions would be specific and clear, and she would answer them as honestly as she could without breaking him. Her phone buzzed on the prep table. Unknown number. She picked it up anyway. You should have told me sooner. Roman's voice, low, controlled, the particular flatness that meant he was working hard to keep it that way. I needed to be certain. 8 months. I said I needed to be certain. A pause. She could hear road noise behind him, the convoy moving. I'm having someone come by the bakery, discreetly. His name is Garrett. He's going to sit outside and watch the street. Roman, it's not negotiable. Don't do that. Don't make decisions about my building without asking me. Someone may already know I was there. Then send Garrett and tell me you're sending Garrett. Ask me first. Another pause, longer this time. Can Garrett sit outside your bakery? Yes, she said. Thank you. She hung up before he could say anything else. She didn't know why she'd added the thank you. It had come out on its own, and she hated it slightly, the way it suggested a softness she couldn't afford right now. She looked at Milo. He was still reading. Milo. After the morning rush, I'm going to need you to stay in the back today, okay? No going out front if there are people you don't know. He looked up. Those eyes. Her eyes, but the steadiness behind them was Roman's. Is it because of the man? It's just a precaution. He held her gaze for a moment with that particular expression that told her he knew she was only giving him part of it. Then he looked back at his book. Okay. She stood up. She had brioche to salvage and a 6-year-old to protect, and roughly 6 hours before whatever Damien Cross had been building for 7 years decided to collect. She went back to work. The morning rush came and went the way it always did. Regulars who wanted coffee and routine. A few strangers sheltering from the rain who bought things they didn't particularly need because the bakery was warm and smelled like something uncomplicated. Alara moved through it automatically, her hands doing the work her brain had trained them to do, while the rest of her mind ran calculations she didn't have enough variables to complete. By 9:30, the crowd had thinned. She could see through the front window a dark gray sedan parked half a block down on the opposite side of the street. Garrett, she assumed. He hadn't come in, hadn't introduced himself, had simply materialized in the way Roman's people materialized, efficiently and without fanfare. The bell above the door rang at 9:47. The woman who walked in was somewhere in her mid-40s, sharp-faced, wearing a coat that was too good for the weather and too deliberate for the neighborhood. She carried no umbrella despite the rain. Her hair was pulled back tightly enough that it looked like it hurt. She scanned the bakery the same way Roman's guards had scanned it that morning, systematically, professionally. And then she walked to the counter and looked at Alara with dark, assessing eyes that gave nothing away. Alara Voss, she said, not a question. Can I help you? Alara said. My name is Sonia Marsh. She set a business card on the counter. Plain white, black text, a phone number, no company name. I work for Roman Valles. He asked me to speak with you directly. Alara looked at the card and didn't pick it up. He didn't mention you. He wouldn't. I'm not something he mentions. She said it without inflection, simply stating a fact. He wants to move you and the boy to the estate tonight. I'm here to facilitate the logistics and answer any questions you have that he's not well positioned to answer. He's not well positioned. Emotion compromises communication, Sonia said. He's currently experiencing some emotion. I am not. That's why I'm here. Alara studied her. How long have you worked for him? 9 years. Were you with him 7 years ago? Yes. When I disappeared? Yes. Alara leaned on the counter slightly. What did you think happened to me? Sonia's expression didn't shift. I thought you were dead. Most people did. And Damien Cross? Something moved through Sonia's eyes. Not surprise, but a sharpening, a recalibration. What about him? Did he think I was dead? A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. You should ask him that yourself, Sonia said carefully. I'm asking you. Ms. Voss, Sonia's voice dropped slightly, the professional smoothness acquiring a thin edge. I've worked for Roman Valles for 9 years, and in that time I have learned which questions to answer and which ones to leave alone. The question you're asking me right now is one I am going to leave alone. What I can tell you is that there is a vehicle ready to transport you and your son to a safe location, and that the window in which doing so is uncomplicated is shrinking. Alara straightened. I'm not going anywhere until I've spoken to Roman directly, in person. He anticipated that, Sonia said. She reached into her coat pocket and set a phone on the counter, already unlocked. already on a call. Alara picked it up and held it to her ear. "You could have just come back yourself," she said. "I'm managing something." Roman's voice was more clipped than it had been 40 minutes ago. Stressed, though he'd cut his throat before he'd used that word. "How much did Sonia tell you?" "That you want us at the estate tonight." "Not tonight, now, this morning." "Roman, Damien knows I was at the bakery." The words landed flat and final. "One of my drivers has been on his payroll. I found out 40 minutes ago." The kitchen. Milo at the corner table with his library book. Alara turned so her back was to the counter. "How long has the driver been?" "Long enough. He reported in this morning." A pause. "Alara, I need you to trust me for approximately 12 hours. After that, you can go back to not trusting me for as long as you want. But right now, I need you and Milo in a place I can control." She looked at the front window. The gray sedan was still there. "The estate," she said. "It's secure. I have people I trust there. Actually trust, not the kind of trust that's been compromised. You'll have your own space. You won't be... I'm not trying to..." He stopped. She could hear him working through something. "I'm not trying to trap you. I know that's what it looks like." "It's what it looks like," she confirmed. "I know." His voice had dropped into something rougher, something less managed. "But I'm asking anyway." She closed her eyes briefly. "Give me an hour to close up," she said. He exhaled. Just once, and quietly. But she heard it. 1 hour. She handed the phone back to Sonia, who clicked it off without a word and returned it to her coat pocket. "I'll need supplies for Milo," Alara said. "He has school tomorrow. I'll need to call and arrange something." "It's already handled," Sonia said. Alara looked at her. "You arranged my son's school absence before I agreed to come." "Roman told me to plan for yes," Sonia said. The closest thing to an apology she was apparently capable of. "Of course he did," Alara said. She went to tell Milo to pack a bag. She kept her voice steady. She told him they were going to stay somewhere else for a little while, that it was like a trip, that she needed him to put his school things and his book and his toothbrush in the blue duffel bag, and not to forget the stuffed rabbit that he would deny, to anyone who asked, was still something he cared about. Milo packed efficiently and without complaint, which should have been reassuring but somehow made the tightness in her chest worse. Roman's estate sat on the northwestern edge of the city's periphery. Not outside it, but at the place where Chicago stopped performing itself and became something quieter and harder to read. The driveway was long and lined with old oak trees that in November looked like they were made of dark wire. The house itself was larger than she'd expected, which meant she'd expected something large because she'd known Roman for 3 years before she ran, and she'd always understood abstractly that the scope of his world was bigger than what he showed. Seeing it was different from understanding it. Milo pressed his face against the car window and said nothing. Roman met them at the door. Not in the dramatic sense, not standing on steps waiting, but in the practical sense that he happened to be in the entry hall when Sonia brought them in, and he looked at Milo first and then at Alara, and his face did the same complicated thing it had done in the bakery that morning, that involuntary fracturing of control that she suspected he would spend the next week being furious with himself about. There's a room on the second floor," he said. 2 beds. Sonia can show you." Milo looked up at Roman with those calm, direct eyes. "Is this your house?" "Yes." "It's very big." "It is." "Do you live here alone?" A pause. "Mostly." Milo seemed to weigh this. "That seems lonely," he said, with the unguarded honesty of a child who hasn't yet learned that some observations are meant to stay internal. Roman looked at the boy for a long moment. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Alara moved Milo along before the moment could stretch further. She followed Sonia up the stairs and spent the next 20 minutes establishing the geography of the room, finding the bathroom, showing Milo where to put his things, testing whether the window lock worked. It did. She checked it twice. She left Milo with his book and went back downstairs. Roman was in what appeared to be a study, a room full of books that looked actually read, which surprised her, and a desk covered in papers he'd pushed to one side to make room for a laptop and 2 phones. He had his back to the door when she entered, but he knew she was there because he said, "Close it," without turning around. She closed the door. "The driver's been dealt with," he said. "What does that mean?" It means he's no longer in a position to report to anyone. He turned around. He's alive, if that's what you're asking. I don't operate the way I used to. I don't know how you operate now. No, he said. You don't. He pulled out the chair across from the desk and gestured at it. She sat because she was tired and because standing felt like a performance. He remained standing, leaning back against the desk, arms crossed, looking at the floor. Tell me about the accounts, he said. The ones you found 7 years ago. Everything you remember. She told him. It took 20 minutes, and she was precise. She'd spent years being precise about this particular memory, storing it carefully, not allowing herself to let the details blur the way other things from that time had blurred. The Delaware Holding Company. The pattern of withdrawals that corresponded to 3 specific dates she'd cross-referenced later with events she'd read about in court records. The name on the secondary authorization, which was not Damien's name, but which she'd eventually, 8 months ago, been able to trace back through 2 shells to an account Damien controlled. Roman listened without interrupting. He was very still. When she finished, he straightened, walked to the window, stood with his back to her for a moment. The dates, he said. I know what happened on those dates, Roman. I looked them up. He turned around. Then you know what he was funding. I know what I could confirm. I know there are things I couldn't. He rubbed the back of his neck. It was such a human gesture, tired and frustrated and very un-Roman, the Roman she'd known and the Roman she'd watched from a distance in the years since, that she felt something shift in her chest that she immediately suppressed. The man who contacted you 8 months ago, he said. Who was it? He told me his name was Victor. He said he'd been inside the organization for 12 years and he was done. Victor Hale, Roman said flatly. You know him. I did. He died in March. Accident. He said the last word with a particular weight that made clear it hadn't been one. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Someone knew he'd talked to you, Roman said. Or knew he was about to, she said. He'd been careful with me. We never met in person, but if someone had been watching him long enough, then they may have already known about you before I walked into your bakery this morning. He looked at her directly. Which means coming here may not have been the thing that put you on Damien's radar. You may have already been on it. The cold that moved through her was not the temperature of the room. She thought about the last 8 months, the sensation she'd occasionally had of being watched, which she'd attributed to anxiety, to the natural paranoia of a woman living a careful life, to nothing, to the city being a city. The car that had been parked across from the bakery for 3 days in September. The phone call from an unknown number that had disconnected the moment she answered it. I've had some things, she said slowly. Small things. I didn't think... When? She told him, each one, in order, as specifically as she could reconstruct them. The more she talked, the tighter his jaw became, and by the time she'd finished, he was doing that thing she remembered from before, processing something with his whole body, the stillness that was not actually stillness but controlled motion, everything internal. He's been watching you, Roman said, probably since Victor made contact, maybe before. He turned away again, and she could see the muscles in his back through the shirt he was wearing. Tension held so long it had become structural. Why didn't he move? Why didn't he... He stopped. Because he was waiting, Ilara said. Roman turned around. If I'm dead, I'm a loose end you might eventually investigate, she said. But if I'm alive and quiet, if I'm living in Pilsen making bread, I'm not a threat. I'm contained. I don't know enough to be dangerous on my own, and I have a child, which means I have something to lose, which means I'm unlikely to do anything reckless. She paused. He was only going to move if something changed, if someone went looking, if the balance shifted. And this morning I walked into your bakery, Roman said. And this morning you walked into my bakery. The understanding moved across his face like weather. He didn't need to act as long as we stayed separated, she said. You weren't looking for me. I wasn't coming to you. We were both exactly where he needed us to be, apart, uninformed, and manageable. She looked at her hands. You showing up this morning wasn't accidental for him. Even if it was accidental for you, it was the thing he'd been waiting for. The disruption. The moment the static arrangement broke down. Roman was quiet for a long time. He'll move now, he said. Yes. He can't let this play out. Not with what you know, not with... He stopped, then more quietly. Not with Milo. She looked up at him. A child is leverage, he said. The words were flat, professional, and beneath them was something that was not flat at all. If Damien knows Milo exists, and he may have known since before I did, he knows how to use him. Against you. Against me. His jaw tightened. Against both of us simultaneously. The door to the study opened. Sonia stood in the doorway. Her face was its usual managed neutral, but something around her eyes was slightly different. A tightness that Alara, in the past 2 hours, was learning to read as Sonia's version of alarm. "We have a problem," she said. Roman said nothing, just looked at her. "The bakery," Sonia said. "Garrett just called. 2 men went in 20 minutes after we left. They weren't customers." She paused. "They went through the back, looking for something." Alara stood up from the chair. "The office," she said. "In the back of the kitchen. I have files there. The documentation I told you about. Copies of what I found, the records I've built up over 8 months since Victor contacted me. I kept them there because I thought—" She stopped. She'd kept them there because she'd thought she was safe. She'd thought she was invisible. She'd thought the bakery was hers and hers alone and that no one was looking. "I need to know if they found them." "Garrett says they were there for approximately 12 minutes, Sonia said. "Then they left in a vehicle registered to a logistics company that dissolved in 2021. 12 minutes. Long enough to search a small office thoroughly. Long enough to find a locked drawer. Long enough to find the backup drive she kept taped under the second shelf of the supply cabinet because she'd seen that hiding place in a movie once and had, until approximately 30 seconds ago, considered it clever. "The drive," she said. "They found it." Roman looked at her. "Everything I had," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that, distantly. "Every record, every communication log, everything Victor sent me and everything I'd built on top of it. Is there another copy?" She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. The word fell into the room and did not bounce. Roman turned to Sonia. "Get Marcus and Webb to the bakery. I want to know exactly what was touched." He turned back to Alara. "The documents. Can you reconstruct any of it from memory?" "Some. Not all. The account structures, yes. The specific authorization chains." She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. "I had transaction records, date stamped. Without those, it's my word against the word of a man who has been building his credibility for 30 years. "Damien has the evidence," Roman said, "or he's already destroyed it." Roman picked up one of the phones on the desk. He made a call, spoke 3 sentences into it in a low voice she couldn't fully hear, and ended it. Then he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not in the 3 years she'd loved him, and not in the hours since he'd walked back into her life. It was the look of a man who had just understood the full shape of the problem he was standing inside, and had arrived at a decision that would cost him something significant. "I need to call Damien," he said. She stared at him. "Roman, not to confront him, not yet." He set the phone down with care. "I need him to believe I don't know. I need him to believe that this morning was a coincidence, that I stopped at your bakery for the Kowalski business, that I didn't recognize you, that I have no idea who you are to me." His eyes met hers. "I need him to think he still has the advantage. And if he already knows that you recognized me, if the driver reported that I went in, spoke briefly with the owner about the Kowalski situation, and left. I didn't report anything about Milo." Roman's voice was very even. "I made sure the driver was in a position where he could only see me enter and leave." She processed this. "You planned for the driver being compromised before you came in this morning." "I planned for the possibility." He paused. "I didn't know about you. I didn't know who was in that bakery. I just knew the driver's pattern was inconsistent, and I didn't know who he was reporting to, so I managed my exposure." "You managed your exposure," she said slowly, "and then walked into a situation you had no way to predict." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment, at the lines around his eyes and the tension that lived in his shoulders, and the careful, precise, exhausted way he was moving through this morning, the same way she was moving through it, step by step, decision by decision, trying to keep everything standing while the ground shifted underneath. "Call Damien," she said. He nodded once, picked up the phone. She turned to walk out of the study, to go upstairs, to check on Milo, To do something with her hands that wasn't standing in a room listening to Roman Valles lie to the man who'd destroyed her life. And she was 2 steps from the door when Sonia said, from the doorway where she was still standing, in a voice that was very quiet and very specific, "Ms. Voss, before you go upstairs." A pause. "There's something you should know about the driver. The report he sent this morning. Roman told you it didn't include anything about Milo." Alara stopped walking. "That's true," Sonia continued. "The driver's report didn't include Milo." Another pause, the kind that meant what came next mattered. "But the driver wasn't the only one watching the bakery this morning." Alara turned around slowly. Sonia's face was still controlled, still neutral, but the tightness around her eyes had deepened into something that looked, beneath all the professional management, like the specific dread of a person who has been carrying a piece of information and knows that delivering it is going to change the temperature of the room irrevocably. "There was a second observer," Sonia said, "stationary, on foot, across the street. We identified him from traffic camera footage 40 minutes ago." She looked at Alara directly. "He was there before Roman arrived. He had a clear sightline to the bakery window." A breath. "He saw everything." The room was very quiet. Roman had lowered the phone. "Damien already knows about Milo," Alara said. Sonia said nothing, which was its own answer. Alara felt it go through her. Not panic, not yet, but the precursor to panic, the cold, specific understanding that the margin she'd thought she had was already gone, had perhaps never existed, and that somewhere in this city, a man who had spent 7 years managing the distance between her and Roman was now looking at a 6-year-old boy and calculating what he was worth. She looked at the ceiling of Roman's study. She breathed in slowly through her nose. Then she looked at Roman, and he was already looking at her, and what passed between them in that moment was not tenderness, and was not history, and was not any of the complicated wreckage of what they'd been to each other. It was simpler and more immediate than any of that. It was two people who understood simultaneously and without any need to say it aloud that they were now in a war they had not chosen and could not exit, and that the only thing left to decide was how they were going to fight it. Roman made the call to Damien standing in the middle of the study with Alara 3 feet away and Sonia still in the doorway, and none of them breathed at full capacity for the duration of it. The phone rang 4 times. Then Damien Cross picked up, and his voice came through the speaker, warm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent decades perfecting the specific frequency of trustworthiness, and said, "Roman, how's the Tuesday treating you?" Not a question. Damien rarely asked questions. He made statements shaped like questions, which gave him the appearance of curiosity while surrendering nothing. "Wet," Roman said. "I was in Pilsen this morning. The Kowalski thing. Resolved. Turns out they were running through a neighboring property, not the one we flagged. Whole morning wasted." He paused exactly the right length. "I'm getting too old for field work." Damien laughed. It was a good laugh, genuine sounding, warm, the laugh of a man who found his colleagues' frustration endearing. "Come by for dinner. We need to talk about the Meridian accounts anyway." "Thursday," Roman said. "I have things Tuesday and Wednesday." "Thursday works. 7 o'clock. 7. He ended the call and set the phone down with the careful steadiness of a man who had been performing calm for so long that he'd lost track of where the performance ended. He looked at Alara. "He doesn't know that I know," he said. "Or he knows, and he's better at this than you are," she said. "He is better at this than I am." Roman said it without ego or embarrassment, simply as fact. "He's been doing it longer, which means we have maybe 48 hours before he figures out that I've figured it out, and in that window I need something I can use." "You need the evidence," she said, "which he now has." "I need something that doesn't depend on the evidence." He turned to Sonia. "Pull everything we have on the Delaware accounts. The shell companies. I want every corporate filing, every registered agent, everything public record." "That won't be enough," Alara said. "I know it won't be enough. I need it as a foundation." He moved to the desk, pushed aside 2 folders, pulled out a legal pad and a pen that looked like it had been chewed on at some point, which was such a small human detail that it briefly disoriented her. "Walk me through the authorization chain again. The one from Victor's documents." She walked him through it again. He wrote as she talked, his handwriting compressed and angular, the pen moving quickly. He asked 3 questions, all specific, all practical. None of them about how she was feeling or what any of this was costing her, which was exactly what she needed from him right now, and which she acknowledged, privately, was one of the things she had once loved about him. His ability to be entirely present inside a problem without letting the surrounding emotion collapse the structure. They worked for 2 hours. Milo came downstairs once, stood in the doorway of the study, looked at the two adults bent over papers, and went back upstairs without saying anything. Alara heard his footsteps above them, the particular rhythm of a child moving through an unfamiliar space with characteristic caution, and tracked them automatically the way she tracked them everywhere, the background monitoring that had become as involuntary as breathing. By noon, they had a framework, not evidence, nothing that would hold in any formal context, but a structure of inference that, combined with the right testimony from the right person, could become something. The problem was the right person. Victor Hale was dead. The driver Roman had neutralized that morning was in no position to offer anything useful. He was low-level, a courier, someone who reported locations and times without understanding what he was reporting or to whom it ultimately flowed. The two men who'd gone through the bakery were untraceable through the dissolved logistics company. Every thread they pulled came back to a knot that had been tied deliberately to resist unraveling. "There's one other person," Ilara said. Roman looked up from the legal pad. "His name is Carl Brewer," she said. "He was Damien's financial liaison for about 4 years. He left the organization in 2020. I found references to him in Victor's documents. Not accusations, just references. His name appeared 3 times in context that suggested he knew more than he was supposed to. Why didn't you mention him earlier?" "Because I don't know where he is. Victor mentioned him as a possible contact, but said he'd gone dark. Moved out of the city, changed his phone." "If he went dark, it's because he was scared," Roman said, "or because someone made him an offer to stay quiet." "Or both." Roman sat back. "I can find him." "Can you find without Damien's people knowing you're looking?" A pause. "Harder." "Then you need to decide if it's worth the exposure." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read. Not blank, but layered, the way a piece of glass is transparent and reflective simultaneously. "You've been planning this," he said. "Not just reacting. You've had a contingency." "I've had 6 years to think," she said, "and 8 months since Victor made contact. Yes, I've been planning." She looked at the legal pad between them. "I just never planned for having help." Something shifted in his expression at that. Something small and quickly controlled, but she caught it. "I'll find Brewer," he said, quietly. She nodded. She started to stand. "Ilara." She stopped. "The photograph." "Photograph," he said. "The one from the envelope. Do you still have it?" She looked at him. "No, I destroyed it 6 years ago." "Do you remember who the federal contact was? The man they photographed you with?" "At the time, I didn't know who he was. I thought he was a journalist. His name was—" She stopped. Something cold moved through her as a piece of information she'd held separately for years suddenly aligned with a piece she'd acquired more recently. His name was Dennis Farrow. Roman was very still. "You know that name," she said. "Dennis Farrow died in 2021, Roman said slowly. He was a federal agent, deep cover, long term. He'd spent 4 years embedded in the Kowalski operation before he was burned." He paused. "He was burned by an anonymous tip. Someone inside the criminal network gave his identity to Kowalski's people." She felt the shape of it forming before she had all the pieces. "Damien," she said. "Damien burned a federal agent," Roman said, "using information that, if it came through the same Delaware accounts, if the timing matches." He picked up the pen, put it down, picked it up again. "He wasn't just manipulating the organization's finances. He was feeding information to federal investigators on one side and burning their agents on the other, playing both ends." "For what purpose?" "Control," Roman said. "Complete control of the organization, of the legal exposure, of who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. If you control what information the government has, you control who survives when things collapse." He looked at the legal pad with an expression that was cold and focused, and beneath both of those things, something that was not quite fury, but was the thing fury comes from. "He's been building an exit for years. A version of this world where everyone around him goes down and he walks away clean. And you, she said, where do you end up in that version? He met her eyes. I go down with the organization, he said. I'm the face of it. I've always been the face of it. That was the design. I run it visibly. I absorb the public exposure. And when the right moment comes, Damien provides just enough information to the right people to make sure I'm the one they look at. The study was very quiet. He built you, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the specific sadness of a fact. He built me, Roman confirmed, and he built the mechanism to dismantle me on a schedule he controls. She thought about a 23-year-old Roman Valles being shaped by a man who was simultaneously designing his destruction, and she thought about what that kind of betrayal meant when it came from someone you'd trusted as completely as Roman had trusted Damien, and she didn't say any of that because none of it was useful right now, and because Roman's face had gone somewhere she recognized, the place where pain becomes architecture, where you take the thing that would break you and you build walls out of it instead. Find Brewer, she said. Yes. She went upstairs. Milo was on the bed with his library book, but when she came in, he put it face down on the blanket in the way that meant he'd been waiting. She sat on the edge of the bed and he moved to sit beside her, close but not touching, maintaining the particular 6-year-old dignity that required proximity without apparent neediness. Are we in trouble? He asked. She looked at her son. At the seriousness of his face and the Roman Valles steadiness behind his eyes, and the small hands that had handed a bread roll to his father 2 hours ago without knowing what he was doing. A little bit, she said. He nodded slowly. Is the man downstairs going to help? He's trying to. He kept looking at me, Milo said. Not distressed, observational. When I came downstairs, he kept looking and then looking away. I know. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because you remind him of something important, she said. Milo absorbed this. Then he picked up his library book again, which meant the conversation was, in his assessment, concluded. She sat beside him for another few minutes, listening to the house settle around them and the rain continue its work outside. And then she went to the window and looked at the driveway and the oaks and the long approach to the gate, and she tried to calculate what 48 hours looked like from where they were standing. She couldn't make the numbers work. At 3 in the afternoon, Roman's phone rang and he took the call in the hallway outside the study, and Alara, coming down the stairs for water, caught the tail end of his half of it. 3 words, spoken in a voice that had dropped below his usual register into something flat and final. How long ago? He ended the call. He turned and saw her on the stairs. They found Brewer, he said. Already? My people are faster than I gave them credit for. He paused. He's in Gary. 40 minutes. He agreed to meet. He agreed? She came down the last 3 stairs. Just like that? He said he'd been waiting for someone to call. Roman's face was doing something complicated. He said he has something he's been holding for 3 years because he didn't know who to give it to. The cold feeling she'd had earlier returned. What kind of something? He wouldn't say on the phone. Roman reached for his coat. I'm going alone. You're not going alone. Alara, you're not going alone to meet a man you've never spoken to who has been hiding for 4 years and claims to have material evidence on a conspiracy that Damien Cross has been running for longer than that. She kept her voice even. You're not doing that. You can't leave Milo here with Sonia's here, she said. Milo has been navigating unfamiliar adults all day. He'll be fine for 2 hours. She looked at him steadily. And I need to be there. If Brewer has documentation, I need to see it. I know what to look for in a way you don't. Roman looked at her. He looked at the wall. He picked up the coat. 2 hours, he said. Gary in November was a particular kind of gray. Not the gray of rain or clouds, but the gray of a city that had been promised things that never arrived. The gray of closed factories and patient streets, and people who had learned to measure everything in decades rather than years. Brewer had chosen a diner that looked like it had been operating since 1974, and had no particular intention of changing anything about itself, which meant it was full of regulars who would notice a stranger and then make a point of not noticing them, which was probably why he'd chosen it. He was in the back booth, 60s, heavy set, wearing a canvas jacket, and the specific exhaustion of a man who had been afraid for a long time. He had a coffee. He wasn't drinking in front of him and both hands visible on the table, which Alara recognized as the body language of someone trying very hard to look unthreatening. He looked at Roman and then at Alara and then back at Roman. "You brought someone," he said. "She's the reason we're having this conversation," Roman said. They slid into the booth across from him. "What do you have, Carl?" Brewer looked at his coffee. "I want to understand the situation first. Before I give you anything, I want to know what you know and what you're planning to do with what I have." "Fair," Roman said. He talked for 6 minutes, concise, specific, pulling back the curtain only as far as necessary. Brewer listened with the attentiveness of someone who knew most of it already and was measuring what he was hearing against what he knew. When Roman finished, Brewer looked at Alara. "You're the woman from the photograph." "Yes." "Damien showed me that photograph," he said. She kept her face still. "When?" "7 years ago, the night you left." He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug without lifting it. "He came to me that night, very late, and he told me there was a problem, that Roman's girlfriend had been making that she'd been removed from the situation." He paused. He used that word, removed. "What did you think he meant?" "I thought he meant she was dead." His voice was flat. "I thought he'd had her killed. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know." He exhaled slowly. "That's on me. I've lived with it." Alara said nothing. "3 months later, I started seeing things I couldn't explain in the accounts," Brewer continued. "Money moving in patterns that didn't correspond to anything I'd been told. I kept records. Not because I had a plan. I was scared, and keeping records made me feel like I had something to hold on to. In 2000, well, Damien, I was done. I wanted out. He let me go, which I didn't expect, and which should have scared me more than it did." He paused. "I think he let me go because he thought I didn't have enough to be dangerous." "Do you?" Roman said. Brewer reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and produced a USB drive. Small, black, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. He set it on the table between them. "Everything I copied before I left," he said. 3 years of account movements, authorization records, 2 sets of communications between Damien and a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office." He looked at Roman. "He's been cooperating with federal prosecutors for 6 years, selectively, feeding them what they need to build cases against everyone around you while keeping himself clean." Roman picked up the drive. He looked at it the way you look at something that has just altered the geometry of your entire situation. "If this is what you say it is," Roman said. "It is." Brewer finally drank some of his coffee. "There's one more thing." He set the mug down. "The accounts in Delaware, the ones your girlfriend found 7 years ago." He looked at Alara. "They weren't just Damien's. There's a second name on the senior authorization. Someone else who's been in this from the beginning." Alara leaned forward slightly. "Who?" Brewer said a name. The name landed in the booth like something dropped from height, and Alara felt the blood leave her face in a single clean movement, because the name was not a stranger's name, was not someone from the periphery of Roman's world, was not someone she could locate at a safe distance from everything she was trying to protect. It was Sonia Marsh. Roman didn't move. Alara looked at him and watched him absorb it, watched the name go through him the way structural damage goes through a building, not visible on the surface immediately, but felt. The whole thing settling differently, the load redistributing into places that weren't designed to carry it. "Sonia," he said, not a question, not disbelief. The voice of a man who was doing the arithmetic and finding that it worked. 9 years, Brewer said quietly. "She was Damien's placement. She came to you through his recommendation. I assume you remember that." "I remember," Roman said. Alara thought about the phone Sonia had set on the counter that morning. Already unlocked. Already on the call. The efficiency with which she'd managed the move to the estate. The specific precision of what she'd told them and when she'd told it, including the information about the second observer, which had sent them both into a defensive posture that kept them on the estate, contained, working from a position of information that Sonia controlled. She thought about Milo upstairs in the estate right now with Sonia in the house. She was already moving before the thought finished. "Roman." Her voice came out very level, which was the thing her voice did when she was past the threshold of panic, into the clarity that lived on the other side of it. Call the estate, right now. Call someone other than Sonia. Roman was already reaching for his phone. He dialed. It rang 6 times. 7, 8. He tried a second number. Same result. A third number. And this one picked up. And the voice that answered was not one she recognized. But Roman's face when he heard it told her everything she needed to know before he said a single word. He lowered the phone. He looked at her, and his face had done the thing again. The fracturing, the loss of all the managed layers, but this time it was not the stunned wonder of seeing his son for the first time, and it was not the cold precision of understanding a betrayal. It was something she had never seen and never wanted to see again. The specific terror of a man who has just understood that he has made an irreversible error in the direction of the person he least could afford to fail. "She's gone," he said. His voice was barely above a level surface. "Sonia's gone. The men I left at the estate are—" He stopped. "Marcus and Webb are unconscious, secured." Alara stood up from the booth. "Milo," she said. "The room is empty," Roman said. "He's not there." The diner went very quiet around her. All the regular sounds of it, the coffee machines and the low conversations and the weather outside. All of it falling away into a silence that was not silence but the roar of a single fact occupying every available frequency. Her son was gone. She stood in the back booth of a diner in Gary, Indiana, 40 minutes from Chicago, and she was completely still, and her hands were at her sides, and her face was very calm. In the way that a face goes calm when the terror inside it is too large for any expression to contain. Roman was on his feet. He was talking, into the phone, to Brewer, to the air, issuing instructions in a voice that was controlled by sheer force of will and nothing else, pulling every available resource, deploying people she didn't know toward a location she couldn't verify, running a response protocol that was fast and precise and professional and entirely beside the point, because the point was that Milo was gone, and Sonia Marsh had been standing in the same house as her son for 2 hours, and Alara had left him there. She had left him there. She looked at Roman, and he looked at her, and she said one thing, very quietly, that was not a question and not a plea, but a statement of what was going to happen next, regardless of what anyone in this diner or this city or this situation thought about it. "I want my son back," she said, "and I will burn every single thing he has built to get him." Roman held her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "I know. Let's go." The drive back to Chicago took 38 minutes because Roman drove it like he was trying to collapse time, and Alara sat in the passenger seat with both hands flat on her thighs and her eyes fixed on the road ahead, and did not say a single word for the first 20 minutes because there were no words that were useful, and she had learned in 6 years of building a life from scratch that when the situation outpaced language, the only thing left was to keep your body still and let your mind work. Her mind worked. Sonia had been in this house for approximately 2 hours before they left for Gary. 2 hours to assess the layout, the staff, the security positions, the location of the room where Milo was. She'd had 9 years of access to Roman's operational methods. She knew how his people were deployed, where the gaps were, what a distraction would look like from the inside. The call Roman had made in Gary, the 3 numbers that hadn't answered, she would have managed those before she moved. Neutralizing Marcus and Webb wasn't improvised. It was prepared, which meant the decision to take Milo had been made before Alara and Roman left the estate, possibly before they'd even discussed going to Gary, which meant Sonia had known about Brewer. Alara turned this over. "She knew we'd find Brewer," she said. Roman's hands tightened on the wheel. "She managed the flow of information," Alara continued. "She told us about the second observer. She told us in a way that created urgency, made us feel like we had 48 hours, like finding corroborating evidence was the priority. She moved us toward Gary." She paused. "Did you find Brewer, or did you find him because someone made him findable?" Roman said nothing for 3 seconds. "I used a channel I trust." "Does Sonia know that channel?" 2 more seconds. "She knows most of my channels." "Then she put Brewer in Gary and made sure he was findable and made sure we'd go," Alara said. Her voice was very even. She was going to keep it even. "She moved us out of the estate and then she took Milo. Why not take him before we left?" "Because she needed us gone first. She needed us 40 minutes away with no quick way back." Alara looked at her hands. "She's not acting alone. She couldn't neutralize your security and move a child in a window that tight without support. She had people waiting." "Damien's people." "Yes, Roman took an exit she didn't recognize. I know where he'd take him. She looked at him. Damien has a property, he said, not listed under his name. It's been operational for 12 years. I set it up for him when I still thought I was setting things up for us. The word us carried the specific weight of something that had meant one thing for a long time and now meant something else entirely. Warehouse conversion in the South Loop. Underground level. I've never had reason to go there in 4 years. He'd know you know about it. He'd know I know about it and he wouldn't care, Roman said, because it's a controlled environment and he's had 4 years to fortify it and he knows exactly how I'd have to come in. He paused. He wants me there, Alara. Milo is the thing that makes me come exactly where Damien wants me. Then we don't go the way he expects. No, Roman said. We don't. He made a call, then another, then a third, speaking in short bursts. Location, numbers, time window, specific equipment. And she listened and built a picture of what Roman Valles looked like when he moved from defense to something else. And the picture was not comfortable, but it was what they had. The rendezvous point was a parking structure in the South Loop, 3 blocks from the warehouse. By the time they arrived, there were 4 cars already waiting, and 7 men she didn't know who looked at Roman when he got out of the car with the focused attention of people who understood that the situation was serious and that their job was to be serious with it. They were not visibly armed in the parking structure, but they had the specific quality of readiness that meant the absence of visible weapons was a courtesy to the environment rather than a fact. Roman briefed them in 4 minutes. She stood beside him and listened and mapped every detail against what she knew about the building's layout from what he'd described in the car. When he finished, one of the men, older, a scar along his left jaw that had healed badly, looked at her and said, without hostility, but with the directness of someone who needed operational clarity, "Who is she, and what's her function?" "She knows the boy," Roman said, "and she knows Damien. She comes in with me." The man looked at her for another moment, reassessing, and she looked back at him without looking away because looking away was not something she was going to do tonight. "Okay," the man said. Roman turned to her. He was carrying something in his voice that she recognized, not from the 3 years they'd been together before, but from the last 12 hours, from the specific intimacy of people who have been working inside a crisis together, the vocabulary that develops not from history, but from shared emergency. "You stay behind me until we know what we're walking into. The moment Milo is in your hands, you move to the extraction point and you don't wait." "And you?" "I'll be finishing something." She held his gaze. "Roman, I'll be right behind you." She didn't believe him entirely, and he knew she didn't believe him entirely, and neither of them had time to resolve it, so she nodded, and he nodded, and they moved. The warehouse was on a block that looked abandoned and wasn't. The ground-level exterior showed nothing: shuttered loading doors, blacked-out windows, the patient stillness of a building that was working hard to appear empty. Roman's people went in 3 directions simultaneously: 2 teams to the exterior access points, 1 team to the utility corridor that ran beneath the building from a basement connection point 2 addresses over. Roman and Alara went in through the utility corridor behind the 3rd team with the man whose scar had healed badly. She learned his name was Teller, moving ahead of them with a small flashlight and the unhurried confidence of someone who had entered hostile spaces before and found them manageable. The corridor was low-ceilinged and smelled of old water and concrete. Her shoulder brushed the wall twice and she didn't slow down. The sound of their movement was absorbed by the space, the soft, irregular rhythm of 4 people moving carefully through a narrow passage. And she focused on Roman's back in front of her and the sound of her own breathing and nothing else. Teller stopped at a junction, held up one hand, voices ahead. Muffled by the door between the corridor and whatever space lay beyond it, but present. At least 2 people. The cadence of conversation rather than argument, which meant the situation on the other side hadn't changed from its baseline yet. Roman turned his head slightly toward her. She nodded. She was ready. He looked at Teller. Teller looked at his watch, waiting for the other teams to be in position. She understood the choreography without needing it explained, the way you understand the structure of something when you're inside it and paying attention. 30 seconds. She thought about Milo. She thought about him very specifically, very practically. The weight of him when he fell asleep against her shoulder, the way he asked questions with his whole face, the bread roll he'd handed to his father 2 hours after meeting him, the stuffed rabbit he'd packed in the blue duffel bag and would deny caring about to anyone who asked. She thought about all of it, and then she put it aside because there was no room for it right now, and it would still be there when this was over. Teller's watch hand moved. He opened the door. The space beyond was cavernous, the gutted interior of the warehouse conversion, the ceiling lost in shadow above industrial lighting that was harsh and insufficient, crates along the walls, a cleared central area that felt deliberate, staged. 3 men were immediately visible, positioned with the casual precision of people who had been told where to stand. They moved the moment the door opened, fast, reactive, professional. And the next 40 seconds were the specific kind of controlled chaos that happens when preparation collides with preparation, and both sides have done their homework. She stayed close to Roman. She tracked the positions of the 3 men, and then there were 2 men, and then 1. And then Roman's people were moving through the space with the systematic efficiency of a sweep, and she was moving with them, looking for Milo, looking for the secondary space, looking for the door that would lead to wherever Damien had staged this final act. There was a staircase at the far end, going down. Roman saw it at the same moment she did. They went down. The lower level was different, finished, climate-controlled. The renovation money visible in the walls and the lighting and the long conference table that occupied the center of the room, like the idea of legitimacy. It smelled like coffee and something chemical, and faintly, under both of those things, the particular staleness of a space that had been occupied for a long time by the same presence. Damien Cross was standing at the far end of the conference table. He was 71 years old, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had spent his life inside rooms like this, who had built his particular power not from physical force, but from the patience to outlast every other force in the room. He was wearing a gray suit, and he was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, and he looked, when Roman came down the stairs, not alarmed, but satisfied. The satisfaction of someone watching a sequence they designed play out as designed. Sonia was standing to his right. She looked at Alara, and her face was the same controlled neutral it had always been, except now the neutrality was a different kind. Not the professional management of a working relationship, but the specific blankness of someone who has made peace with the choice they've made and doesn't require the other party's understanding. Milo was on a chair against the left wall. He was unharmed. She saw that first, and the breath she'd been half holding since Gary released in a way she didn't let show on her face. I was unharmed, and he was sitting with the particular stillness he defaulted to in high-stress situations, the rabbit who goes very still and watches stillness. And when he saw her, his face changed, not into relief, not into tears, but into a single expression she knew better than her own name, the one that said, "I knew you'd come," with a certainty that cost him nothing, because it had never occurred to him to doubt it. She wanted to go to him immediately. She didn't. "Roman," Damien said. His voice was exactly as it had always been, warm, unhurried, the voice of a man performing a welcome. "You made good time." Roman descended the last 2 stairs and stopped at the edge of the conference table. He did not look at Sonia. He looked at Damien with the specific quality of attention of a man who has seen something clearly for the first time after a long period of looking at it wrong. "How long?" Roman said. "After I started," Damien said. "How long did you plan to let it run?" Damien tilted his head slightly. "Another 3 years, perhaps 4. The federal timeline is—" "Don't explain it to me like it's a business plan," Roman said. His voice was very low and very flat. "You took a child." "I borrowed a child," Damien said, "for approximately 2 hours. He's unharmed. He's been given water and a sandwich, and I've had someone reading to him from a— What is that?" He glanced at Milo with the mild curiosity of a man noticing an interesting detail. "A library book, it appears. I'm not a monster, Roman." "You burned a federal agent," Roman said. "You framed a woman who had done nothing. You took her life apart, and then spent 7 years waiting to see if the pieces caused you a problem." "She found things she shouldn't have found," Damien said. The warmth in his voice had not diminished. That was the most terrible thing about it. The warmth was still there, unchanged, the same frequency he'd used for 30 years. "What would you have done?" "Not that." "You don't know what you would have done. You were 25 and in love and completely unequipped to understand what you were building." He looked at Alara for the first time. "She's smarter than you gave her credit for. She should have stayed gone. The arrangement was stable." Elara looked at Damien Cross and felt something settle in her chest that was not calm, but was the cousin of it. The specific clarity that comes when you are looking directly at the source of the thing that destroyed your life. And it is smaller than you imagined, more ordinary, more tired. The USB drive, she said. Damien looked at her. Carl Brewer's documentation, she said. You know he had it. You've known for at least a year, which is why Victor Hale died in March, and why you let Brewer stay in Gary rather than moving against him. Because Brewer's dead, the documentation becomes an estate matter, potentially discoverable. Brewer alive and quiet is better for you than Brewer dead and investigated. She paused. But Brewer alive and talking is the one thing you can't manage. Something shifted in Damien's expression, just slightly, the satisfaction acquiring a hairline fracture. We have the drive, she said. We have Brewer's testimony, and I have 7 years of motivation to make sure it reaches every person in this city it needs to reach. You have a drive, Damien said carefully, the authenticity of which will be questioned. By who? Roman said. Your contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office? His name is on the drive, Damien. His communications are on the drive. He's not going to be in a position to question anything. He's going to be managing his own situation. The hairline fracture widened. Sonia moved. She moved fast, not toward Roman, not toward Elara, but toward Milo, which was the calculation Elara had already run and already prepared for, because when you have been protecting one specific person for 6 years, you develop an instinct for the vectors of threat that operates faster than conscious thought. Elara was already crossing the room when Sonia reached the chair, and what happened next was not graceful and was not cinematic. It was a woman who had spent 6 years getting up at 4 in the morning and lifting 50-pound flour sacks and running a business alone, putting her entire body between a trained operative and her son with the specific ferocity of something that has no gear below maximum. Sonia was stronger, Elara was faster and had more at stake, which in the immediate short term counted for more. They went sideways into the wall, Elara's shoulder taking the impact, white flare of pain from the collarbone down. And Sonia's grip on her arm was iron and professional, and Elara bit back the pain and used the wall to push back and got one hand free and used it the way you use a hand when you have no training and no weapon and your child is 18 inches away. It wasn't elegant. It worked. Sonia went down to one knee. Not out. She was already recovering, already repositioning. But the one knee was enough, and Elara stepped between her and Milo and said to her son, with a voice so steady it frightened her slightly in retrospect, "Do not move from that spot." "Okay," Milo said. His voice was steady too. He was his father's son in the worst and best possible ways. Roman had moved the moment. Sonia moved. He was at the other end of the table, and Damien was no longer standing with his hands clasped behind his back. He had produced a phone and was looking at it with an expression that had finally, after everything, dropped the warmth entirely and become what it had always been underneath, calculated, cold, the face of a man running odds. "The men upstairs are dealt with," Roman said. "I have more than the men upstairs," Damien said. "I know you do." Roman walked the length of the conference table slowly, and his face was doing nothing. No expression, no tell, the absolute stillness of someone who has moved past the point where feeling is a factor. "I also know you won't use them right now, because if you use them right now, the drive becomes evidence of a murder and not just a conspiracy, and that changes the math in ways that don't work for you." Damien looked at the phone, looked at Roman. "You walked away from your principles at 23, Roman said, stopping at the opposite end of the table. "I walked away from mine at 25. Neither of us gets to be righteous tonight." He paused. "But I have the drive, and I have Brewer, and I have a woman who is going to take my son out of this building right now, and you are going to let them go because the alternative is a situation where you have nothing left to protect." Damien was quiet for a long time. Teller appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Then 2 of the other men. The room reorganized silently around the new arithmetic. Sonia was on her feet again. She was bleeding slightly from her lip, Elara's elbow, the wall, the geometry of the thing. And she was looking at Roman with an expression that was the first genuinely unmanaged thing Elara had seen from her all day. Something between professional resignation and something older and more complicated than that. 9 years, Roman said to her. He didn't say it with anger. He said it the way you say something that you are going to have to find a way to live with. Sonia said nothing. Take Milo out, Roman said to Alara. She looked at him. I'll be 5 minutes behind you, he said. Roman, 5 minutes, he said. And then, more quietly, in a register that was not for the room, but only for her, I promise. She looked at him for 1 second. 1 second of everything. 6 years and a bread roll and a legal pad, and 40 minutes of darkness in a utility corridor, and the specific exhausted human realness of a man trying to become something different than what he'd built himself into. She took Milo's hand. He stood immediately, tucked the library book under his arm with the automatic proprietary instinct of a child, and looked up at Roman once. That serious, measuring look he'd given him in the bakery that morning. A look that had not changed despite everything that had happened since. Are you coming? Milo asked. Roman looked at the boy for a moment that was very brief and contained more than Alara could catalog. Yeah, Roman said. I'm coming. They went up the stairs. Behind her, she heard Damien say something, low, controlled, the last repositioning of a man who still believed there was a play left. And she heard Roman's answer, which was 3 words she couldn't make out, and then the sound of the room below settling into whatever it was going to become in the next 5 minutes. The endgame of 30 years of architecture built on betrayal finally meeting the one force it had never accounted for. She held Milo's hand through the upper floor, through the warehouse space that smelled like concrete dust, up into the utility corridor where the flashlight made a small yellow circle on the low ceiling, and Milo walked beside her without pulling or dragging, his small hand warm and certain in hers. They came out into the November night. She stood on the pavement with her son, and the cold air hit her face, and she breathed it in, all the way in, past the collarbone that was going to bruise badly by morning, past the place where her ribs had caught the wall, past the 6 years and the 4 in the morning, and the flower-covered hands and all of it. And she looked up at the sky above the south loop and waited. 60 seconds. Then the door behind them opened, and Roman walked out alone. And the expression on his face was not victory and was not relief, and was not the clean resolution of a story that has worked out the way it was supposed to. It was the face of a man who has just handed something over that he has been carrying for a very long time and does not yet know what his hands feel like without the weight of it. He stopped a few feet from them. Milo looked at him. You came, Milo said. I said I would, Roman said. Milo appeared to find this satisfactory. He shifted his library book to the other arm and looked at the street around them with the practical curiosity of a child conducting a location assessment. And Alara looked at Roman, and Roman looked at her, and everything that needed to be said was in the air between them, dense and unresolved and completely real, the raw material of something that was not yet a future, but was not nothing either. Damien, she said. Contained, Roman said. Teller has him. The drive goes to a contact who is not connected to anything Damien can reach, and it goes tonight. He paused. It's not finished. It's going to take time, and it's going to be complicated, and there are going to be days in the next year where I don't know which way it falls. But it started. He looked at Milo and his face did that thing. The fracturing, the involuntary exposure of something that had no armor left to hide behind. It started, he said again, quieter, and she understood that he was not only talking about Damien. She nodded. Above them, Chicago pressed in from all sides. The lights and the traffic and the cold November architecture of a city that did not slow down for the particular private earthquakes of the people moving through it. And the 3 of them stood on the pavement outside a warehouse in the South Loop, and Milo reached up and took Roman's hand without asking permission or explaining himself, the way children reach for things they've decided belong to them. And Roman looked down at his son's hand in his with an expression that was the last thing Alara had expected from this night, and the only thing, she realized, that had ever really mattered about any of it. Can we go somewhere warm? Milo said. I'm hungry. Roman looked at Alara. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. They found a diner 3 blocks north of the warehouse, the kind of place that existed in the gaps between other things. Not good enough to be a destination, not bad enough to close. Just open and warm and indifferent to the condition of the people who came through its door at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. A man with flour on his hands or blood on his jacket or the specific stunned expression of someone who had just survived something would not attract particular attention here, which was, Alara understood as they slid into the corner booth exactly what they needed. Milo ordered pancakes. He studied the laminated menu with the same focused seriousness he brought to library books and bread ratios, asked the waitress whether the syrup was real maple or the other kind, accepted the answer, the other kind, without complaint and ordered anyway. He was 6 years old and he had spent 2 hours in an underground room with people he didn't know, and he wanted pancakes and he was going to have them. And Alara watched this transaction and felt something in her chest come apart in a way that was not grief and was not relief, but was the specific dissolution of a tension that had been structural for so long that its absence changed the whole architecture of how she was sitting. Roman ordered coffee. He sat across from her and beside Milo, and he looked at the table and at his hands and at the window and at Milo's face with the periodic helpless attention of a man who keeps being surprised by the same fact and hasn't yet built up a tolerance for it. "Your collarbone," he said. "It's fine." "It's not fine. Sonia hits like—" "I know how Sonia hits," Alara said. "I was there." He looked at her and she looked at him. And the thing that passed between them was something that would have been, in a different context, almost funny. The dark, specific humor of people who have been through something together and are still processing whether they're allowed to acknowledge it yet. "She'll be charged," Roman said, "along with Damien, the contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office. His name is Harlan Webb, which is not a coincidence I've fully processed yet, given that I also have a man named Webb on my payroll, is going to have a significant problem by morning. Teller is moving the drive tonight to someone I trust outside the city, a former federal investigator who went private 6 years ago and who has reason to want Damien cross-examined closely." "What reason?" "Dennis Farrow," Roman said. "The agent Damien burned. The investigator was his partner." Alara looked at him. "You knew about her." "I found out 18 months ago that Damien had a contact in federal prosecution. I didn't know it was Webb, didn't know the specifics. I was building toward finding out when this morning happened." He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "I've been running my own investigation of Damien for a year and a half, quietly, alone. Which is why I had a channel to find Brewer that I believe Sonia didn't know about." He paused. "I was wrong about that. She knew. She used it. But she didn't know everything I'd already moved into position, which is why tonight ended the way it did rather than the other way." Alara absorbed this. "You've been building a case against your own mentor for a year and a half." "Yes." "While running the organization." "Yes." "Why didn't you—" She stopped. "Tell someone?" He looked at her with an expression that was tired and precise and carried the weight of a specific loneliness. "Tell who, Alara?" "Sonia was my closest operational advisor. My inner circle had been with me for years, most of them through Damien's introductions. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know if it was 2 people or 10. He exhaled. "I was alone in it. That's been the design for 30 years. Make Roman Valles the most visibly powerful man in the room and the most completely isolated one at the same time." The pancakes arrived. Milo addressed them with methodical focus. "The woman from this morning," Milo said, without looking up from his plate. "Sonia. She was nice to me. In the room." Neither adult spoke for a moment. "She gave me water," Milo continued, "and a sandwich. And she read to me from my book." He looked up. "Is she a bad person?" Roman looked at Alara. Alara looked at Milo. "She made bad choices," Alara said carefully. "For a long time. That's different from being a bad person. But the difference doesn't always change what happens to you because of those choices." Milo considered this with the expression he used for problems that required a long processing period. Then he went back to his pancakes. "Okay," he said. Roman watched the boy eat with an expression that Alara was not going to try to describe, because any description she could find would be inadequate and slightly wrong, and some things were better left in the register where they actually lived. They stayed in the diner until Milo's eyes began to do the slow, involuntary closing of a child who has held it together through an extraordinary amount of difficult material and has now, in the warmth and the safety of a corner booth, run out of available alertness. He fell asleep leaning against Roman's arm with a completeness that was characteristic. Milo slept the way he did everything else, with his whole self committed to it, no half measures. Roman sat very still so as not to disturb him and held his coffee with the other hand, and Alara watched them from across the table. "He's going to have questions," she said quietly. "I know," A lot of them. He's that kind of kid. I can see that. Roman looked at his son's sleeping face. What do you want me to tell him? The truth. In pieces. At a pace he can manage. She paused. He already knows more than most 6-year-olds know about how the world actually works. He's been paying attention his whole life. She looked at her coffee, which she hadn't touched because her collarbone made lifting things painful, and she hadn't wanted to do that in front of Roman. He won't break. That's not who he is. He's not who I expected, Roman said. What did you expect? He thought about it. Something more fragile. Something that needed more protection. He looked at the sleeping boy. He handed me a bread roll this morning, like it was the most natural thing, like he'd already decided I was worth feeding. He does that, she said. He feeds people he's not sure about. It's his way of giving them a chance. Roman was quiet for a moment. He got that from you. She looked at him. The bakery, he said, building something that feeds people. It's not an accident what you built. He held her gaze. You've been doing what you always did, making something that opens at 5 a.m. and asks nothing from the people who come through the door except that they show up. She felt the truth of it land in her chest and sit there, warm and slightly uncomfortable, the way true things sometimes felt. I didn't build it for a reason, she said. I built it because I needed to eat and I knew how to bake. Sure, he said. Not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging that she was allowed to tell it that way, if she wanted. They sat in the diner until 11. Then Roman carried Milo to the car. The boy didn't wake, just rearranged himself against Roman's shoulder with the unconscious trust of someone who has already, on some level below consciousness, made a decision. And Alara walked beside them through the November cold with her hands in her jacket pockets and her collarbone making itself known with every step. And none of them said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said in that specific moment that the moment wasn't already saying on its own. The weeks that followed were not clean. Nothing about what came next was clean, and Alara had stopped expecting cleanness sometime around 4 years ago when she'd finally accepted that clean was a story you told after the fact to make the survival make sense. What the weeks actually were was complicated and exhausting and intermittently frightening and threaded through with moments of unexpected ordinariness that were harder to process, in some ways, than the crisis had been. Damien Cross was taken into federal custody 6 days after the warehouse. The arrest was not dramatic. She learned about it from Roman, who told her in a text message that contained 3 sentences and no excess language, which was how Roman communicated information he was still working out how to feel about. The case that had been building for a year and a half, supplemented by Brewer's drive and Brewer's testimony, and the unraveling of Harlan Webb's position in the U.S. Attorney's Office, was sufficient to hold Damien without bail. He was 71 years old and he had been building toward an exit for 30 years, and the exit had closed in front of him, and Alara thought about him occasionally in the weeks that followed. Not with sympathy, not with satisfaction, but with the particular complicated acknowledgement of a person who has looked directly at something terrible and found it, at its core, deeply ordinary. Sonia Marsh cooperated with prosecutors. This surprised Alara, and did not surprise Roman, who said only that Sonia had always been practical, and that cooperation was the practical choice, and that he'd known her well enough to know she would make it, which was not forgiveness, and was not understanding, but was something adjacent to both that Alara did not have a clean word for. Carl Brewer was placed in a temporary protective arrangement and then relocated, which was his choice and which Alara respected. She sent him a letter that she didn't know if he received. She told him in it that what he'd done in the diner in Gary had cost him something and had cost her nothing in comparison, and that she understood if he never wanted to think about any of them again. She meant it. The bakery reopened on a Thursday, 11 days after it had closed. She'd expected some damage from the men Damien sent through. And there had been damage, the office ransacked, the backup drive gone, 2 supply shelves knocked over in a way that had scattered dried fruit across the kitchen floor in a pattern that took an hour to clean. But the display case was intact, and the oven was intact, and the hand-painted sign above the door that said Voss and Copy was intact. And when she unlocked the front door at 5:30 on that Thursday morning, and the smell of the place came back to her, the specific compound of flour and yeast and old wood, and the particular cold weather draft that came through the bottom of the door that still stuck in humidity, she stood in the doorway for a moment and let it be what it was. Milo was not in the kitchen that first morning. He was in school, which was where he was supposed to be, and the normalness of that fact was the most extraordinary thing she'd experienced in weeks. By 6:15, the first regular came in. He was a retired postal worker named George, who came every Thursday for an Americano and the honey walnut rolls and conversation about whatever the week had produced. He set his umbrella by the door and settled on to his usual stool at the counter and looked at her the way someone looks when they've been worried and don't know how to say it directly. "You were closed," he said. "Family thing," she said. He nodded. He accepted this with the grace of someone who understood that sometimes family thing was the full story. "Rolls?" "Just came out," she said. She put them in front of him and made his Americano, and the morning came through the window in the specific cold gray way of November in Chicago, and the oven hummed behind her, and the street outside slowly filled with the ordinary industry of people going where they needed to go. And Alara stood behind her counter and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, and let the work be what it had always been. The anchor, the ground under her feet, the thing that asked her every morning to show up, and in return gave her the uncomplicated satisfaction of something made from scratch. Roman came in at 7:45. He was not in a convoy. He was alone, on foot, wearing a coat that was not the expensive kind, and he had what appeared to be a light graze along his left jaw from something she hadn't asked about yet, and he stood at the door for a moment the way someone stands in a place they're not entirely sure they're welcome before coming in. She didn't say anything. She put a cup on the counter. He came in. He sat at the counter, 2 stools down from George, and George glanced at him once with the disinterest of a man who has seen a lot of people on a lot of mornings and made his assessments quickly. "Coffee?" Alara said. "Please," Roman said. She poured it. She slid it across. He wrapped both hands around it the same way he had at the diner in Gary, and for a moment the bakery was just a bakery, and the morning was just a morning, and the two of them were just 2 people who had history and coffee between them. George finished his rolls, left exact change on the counter the way he always did, collected his umbrella, and went back out into his Thursday. The door swung shut. The bakery was briefly empty except for the 2 of them. "The Meridian accounts," Roman said. "The ones Damien mentioned at the end. Legitimate business holdings, some of them. I've been working with a legal team to separate what's clean from what isn't." He looked at his coffee. "There's more clean than I expected. Not enough to pretend the rest doesn't exist, but enough to build something from." "What kind of something?" "Freight logistics. 3 distribution centers. A property management company that's been running mostly above board for 6 years, because the people I put in charge of it turned out to be better at legitimate business than I expected." He paused. "A security consulting firm that, with some restructuring, could become something that actually does what it says on the door." She looked at him. "I'm not walking out clean," he said. "I want to be clear about that. There's going to be legal exposure. There are going to be things I have to answer for, and I'm going to answer for them, because the alternative is spending the next decade looking over my shoulder at the thing I didn't deal with." He held her gaze. "But I'm not building what I was building anymore. That's done. That decision was made in a warehouse basement, and I made it clearly, and I'm not revisiting it." "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you built something in this neighborhood from $40 and a stuck back door," he said. "And I need to know whether I'm building something adjacent to that or whether I'm building somewhere else entirely." She looked at him for a long moment, at the graze on his jaw and the lines at the corners of his eyes, and the careful, genuine exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has recently set it down and doesn't yet know how to stand without the weight of it. "Milo gets out of school at 3:15, she said. He looked at her. "On Fridays, he helps me with the afternoon prep." She picked up a cloth and wiped down the section of counter between them. "The honey walnut rolls are his responsibility. He's been doing it for 8 months, and he's gotten precise about the ratio." She set the cloth down. "If you want to be here at 3:15 on Friday, you can meet him in the kitchen instead of the dining room. That's different. That's not a trip or a coincidence. That's a regular thing." Roman was very still. "It's not forgiveness," she said, "and it's not a promise of anything specific. It's Friday at 3:15. "Okay," he said. His voice was not smooth. It had a catch in it that he didn't try to cover. "Okay," she said. 2 more customers came in. She moved to take their order, and Roman sat at the counter and finished his coffee and didn't leave immediately, just sat in the way people sit in places they're learning to be comfortable in. a little careful, a little too aware of themselves, but staying. Friday came. Roman was there at 3:10, 5 minutes early, standing outside the bakery, looking at the hand-painted sign with an expression she caught through the window before he saw her looking. She didn't analyze the expression. She went and unlocked the back door so he could come in through the kitchen. Milo was already at the prep table in his small apron, which was blue and slightly too large and had a pocket in the front that he used to keep a measuring spoon he particularly liked. He looked up when Roman came through the back door, and his face did the thing. The measuring, the assessment, the long, serious look of a child who has already thought about this moment and has arrived at a preliminary conclusion. "You came," Milo said. "Your mom said I could," Roman said. Milo appeared to consider the accuracy of this information and find it satisfactory. "I'm doing the rolls," he said. "You can watch." "Okay." "Don't touch anything until I say." "Okay." Alara stood at the other end of the prep table and kneaded dough and did not say anything and did not need to say anything because the scene that unfolded over the next 40 minutes said everything that needed to be said. And it said it in the language of a 6-year-old explaining the precise honey-to-walnut ratio to a man who had controlled a criminal empire for 15 years and who was listening with his complete and genuine attention, nodding when appropriate, asking one careful question about proofing time that Milo answered with slightly condescending patience, and then standing back and letting the boy work, because Milo had been very clear that standing back and letting him work was the protocol. At 4 o'clock, the first batch came out of the oven. Milo put on the oven mitts that were also too large and pulled out the tray with the careful focus of someone who had been taught to respect heat, and he set the tray on the cooling rack and stepped back and looked at the rolls with the satisfaction of a craftsman. He took one off the rack, the proper way, fingers protecting themselves, and held it out to Roman. Roman took it in both hands. It was the same gesture as the first morning, the test roll in the bakery before everything started, the offering from a child who didn't know yet what he was giving and to whom. Except this time, Milo knew. In the specific partial way that children know things, not the full weight of it, not the history or the loss or the 7 years or any of what the 2 adults in the room carried, but the essential shape of it, the thing that mattered. This was his father, and his father was here, and he was going to give him a role because that was what you did. Roman ate it this time. He ate it the way you eat something when you're trying to pay attention to it, slowly, present, not automatically. And then he looked at Milo and said, "That's the best thing I've had all year." Milo's face did something extraordinary. Not a big thing, not a grin or a burst of joy, but a small, private, deep satisfaction. The look of a child who has made something and had it received properly, which is its own specific happiness that has no exact match in adult experience. "I know," Milo said. Alara turned back to her kneading and did not let them see her face for a moment, and the oven hummed behind her and the late afternoon came through the kitchen window in the low gold way of November sun, finding its brief angle. And the bakery held all 3 of them in the particular way places hold people when they become real to each other. Not the place itself, but the space made by showing up in it repeatedly and honestly until it knows you. The investigation into Damien Cross took 8 months to reach the point where charges were formally filed. During that time, Roman appeared before a federal investigator 3 times. He was represented by counsel, and he was honest about what he'd been, and what he'd built, and what he hadn't known, and what he had, and the honest accounting was difficult and costly in ways that were not only legal but personal. The specific cost of saying true things about yourself out loud in a room where people are writing them down. He was not charged. This was not because he was clean, but because the cooperation he provided and the documentation he surrendered and the specific structure of what could be proven and what couldn't added up, and the calculus of people whose job was to make those calculations, to a number that came out on the side of valuable witness rather than prosecutable defendant. He understood this was not justice. He said so, once, to Alara, and she said nothing back because there was nothing to say and because she knew he wasn't looking for absolution, just for someone to hear him acknowledge it. Sonia Marsh received a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. 3 years, federal facility. She sent Roman a letter 6 months after sentencing, which he showed Alara without comment. The letter was 1 paragraph, precise and unsentimental, and it contained 1 sentence that Alara read twice. "I told myself for 9 years that loyalty to an institution was the same as loyalty to a person, and I was wrong about that. And I don't expect you to accept that as an explanation, only as the thing that is true. Roman did not respond to the letter. Alara didn't ask him why. Some things are answered by silence, and the silence is the correct answer. Carl Brewer sent a postcard from somewhere he didn't name. On the back, in handwriting that was small and slightly shaky, was a single line, "I hope the boy is well." Alara put it on the refrigerator in the bakery kitchen, next to Milo's drawing of the proofing oven that he'd done at school in October. The bakery changed slowly over the following months in ways that were small and unremarkable and completely visible to anyone paying attention. A second stool appeared at the prep table, a set of measuring tools in the drawer that were too large for Milo's hands and too precise for casual baking. A coffee mug on the shelf that was used by someone who came in on most Fridays and some Tuesdays, and occasionally on Wednesday mornings when the week had been difficult, and who had learned over the course of those visits that the best honey walnut rolls required patience in the proofing stage, and that Milo would tell you this with great authority and that he was not wrong. By February, the sign above the bakery door still said Voss & Co. Milo noticed this one Thursday morning while he was putting on his school backpack. He stood in the doorway of the bakery looking at the sign with his particular calculating expression. "The Co part," he said. "What about it?" Alara said. "It used to be for a partner you didn't have yet." He looked at her. "Do we have one now?" She looked at her son's face in the gray February light. Her eyes, his jaw, 6 years of early mornings, the specific complicated grace of a child who had navigated more than any child should, and had come through it not unscathed but intact. And she looked past him at the street where a car she recognized was pulling up to the curb, arriving exactly when it had said it would. "We're figuring that out," she said. Milo looked at the car, then back at the sign. He seemed to run a calculation of his own and arrive at a result he found acceptable. "Okay," he said. He adjusted his backpack strap. "Can we have the rolls tonight?" "We can have the rolls tonight." He went to school. Alara stood in the doorway of her bakery and watched Roman get out of the car, and he looked at her from the curb, and neither of them said anything for a moment because the morning was quiet and the street was its ordinary self, and there was nothing that needed to be said right now that couldn't wait until they were standing in the same place. He walked across the street. She stepped back from the doorway to let him in. He stopped just inside the threshold, just far enough for her to close the door behind him, which she did, and then they were standing in the bakery before the morning rush with the smell of yesterday's bread still in the walls, and the oven already running, and the light coming through the front window in the specific way that meant the day was starting and was going to require the same thing every day required: showing up, doing the work, and trusting that something real could be built from what you had and where you were and who was willing to stand in the kitchen and learn the ratio. "The rolls are proving," she said. "Do you need help?" he said. She handed him an apron. He put it on without comment, which was the correct response, and she went back to the prep table, and he followed her, and they stood in the kitchen of the bakery she'd built from nothing, and they began the morning the same way every morning began, with the work and the light and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of being alive and in the same room. Outside, Chicago moved through its Tuesday with its characteristic indifference to the particular private histories of the people inside it, and the sign above the bakery door held its paint against the February wind, and the oven held its heat, and the day held everything else.